Welcome to Wait, What? Sportsbiz Chat with DP and McGee, the podcast that takes an often irreverent, sometimes cynical, and on occasion, a serious look at the business of sports. I'm your co-host, David Parro.
And I'm Tim McGee.
Well, we're down to the Final Fours in the NCAA tournaments with the men heading to San Antonio, women heading to Tampa, and I can see us spending a fair amount of time on that subject here this week. But there's a spoiler alert. We have an incredible guest today. Someone that Tim and I have admired for years, making this episode of the Sportsbiz Chat a Legend Series event. But we'll put that aside for a second, and we'll get going. So, Tim, what's on your mind?
Wait a second, David. Yeah, the Yankees just hit another home run.
Oh,
let's talk Torpedo Bats. The Yankees hit 9 home runs in their opening series against the Milwaukee Brewers. Some of the players on the team, most notably Jazz Chisholm, and I have to say his name very slowly so as not to mispronounce it, using a new style of bat that was actually designed by an MIT physicist to put the center of mass closer to the sweet spot on the bat, which ostensibly provides more distance and more exit velocity on the ball when it comes off the bat. So, of course, a lot of people in Major League Baseball are crying foul, saying it's not fair, it should be illegal. I think the Yankees simply utilized a resource that other teams have not yet used to create a distinct advantage, apparently. I think the sample size is way too small, but apparently, at least early returns are that this is going to cause more home runs off the bat.
Well, I don't think there's any doubt that the physics of this do make sense. And what's happened is this bat, as you say, redistributes, that sweet spot, I suppose, to where a batter, when he's getting jammed, say, has the ability to get more bat on the ball or bat in the right spot. And that seems to be what's happening. It's amazing to me that this hadn't been thought of before or developed before. Maybe people feeling that it would have gone against the rules. It doesn't appear that it goes against the rules. My understanding is that this gentleman that invented it was actually working with the Marlins. So I'm not sure why the Yankees so quickly were the ones to get on this. Other teams, obviously, I'm sure they're filling a ton of orders. And a lot of the main bat makers are involved in this and probably selling bats like crazy and probably trying to fulfill as many orders as they can. It's definitely going to change the game. Outside of Major League Baseball, at the lower levels of the game, wooden bats aren't even used, right? So I don't know if this changes what the other styles of bats, the aluminum bats that are manufactured, if their shape changes to increase that. Listen, what Major League Baseball hitters do is such an amazing skill that they still have to be able to get around and get a bat on the ball. But yeah, I think this means that more balls are going to be hit in such a way that they can carry over. That's what they're saying, and that's what the numbers are showing. And will that change excitement? Probably. Will Major League Baseball respond with changing up the ball, say, in the future? It's very much like what golf has gone through a lot. But in this case, I don't think they can go and just change the fields and make them longer like they do in golf.
No, I don't think they will do that. I think the pendulum has swung back a little bit. For the last few years, the advantage has really been with the pitchers. And the batting averages were way down, in part because it was an all or nothing approach to hitting, right? All these hitters with the plane of their swing being at an angle such that they were shooting for home runs, and now pitchers starting to pitch up in the strike zone, making it more difficult to swing in an upward plane because it's just not natural based on the height of the hitter and the path of the ball. But baseball continues to tinker. It continues to innovate to remain relevant with a younger audience, and this is just another example of that. I think it's not unlike the tush push in football where they tabled the rule change on that, where one team has been able to take advantage of that because of the physical stature of their quarterback. This is analogous in the sense that one team is taking advantage of this new bat design, but doesn't mean that every other team can't do it. They just weren't smart enough or weren't informed enough to do it before the Yankees did. But to your point, there's probably orders being fulfilled now that many players in Major League Baseball will be going for that. Interesting to note that the Yankees' best player, Aaron Judge, is using a traditional bat and has gotten off to a great start himself.
Right.
So,
yeah, which isn't a surprise because he always seems to get off to a great start. I did hear, because Dave Portnoy, the founder of Barstool, who tends to go on these rants on occasion, and he does these
God, what a whiny Boston homer.
He always goes on these emergency press conferences or whatever he calls it to whine about something usually. He's saying that Judge is using something different. I don't know if that's the case. Judge hit a ton of home runs last year, obviously, and started off super strong.
Second best player in baseball.
I do think we're behind Ohtani.
Ohtani, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Listen, I think the one place where Portnoy was right in his rant was that it is helping people as they, when they get jammed on a pitch and that ball's a little more inside, it's not hitting what the traditional barrel of the bat is, it goes out. I'm curious. Listen, I look at these things. I do think it's going to be exciting for the game. I do think it's one of these, another nice news story for MLB, whether they have to address it among ownership at some point. I doubt it, because I think it's bringing so much new attention to the game, and agree with you that maybe that is a swing back, pardon the pun, toward the hitter's advantage. It does seem to fly off the bat like the old cork bats, the Sammy Sosa special, but they look cool, by the way, if you ask me. I think they look pretty cool.
Yeah, you have to, first of all, you've got to remember the day the Yankees hit the most home runs in New York, it was like 70 degrees and the wind was blowing out, right? The next day, a lot of those home runs, what would have been home runs the prior day, were long fly balls out to the outfield. Now, Chisholm hit a home run on that Sunday where it was cold, but he hit it inside the right field pole, which is the shortest porch in Yankee Stadium. I don't know the exact dimensions, but
well, listen, the hitters aren't going to these bats unless they think it's going to give them advantage, and they're going to try it. Interestingly, by the way, I haven't heard Louisville Slugger's name in the mix on this, and you may have some insight on that. But these other manufacturers, Victus and Marucci and Chandler, and supposedly they're selling them. They're selling them to teams. These aren't marketing deals yet, right?
Mm-hmm.
For $199 to $239 a piece. And I think I just read that the average major league salary is now over $5 million. Did I see that correctly? I'm guessing they can afford a few of these torpedo bats.
They're not paying for them out of pocket.
Well, I'm just saying, if they were,
right? Yeah,
I'm making a joke about the price of these bats.
I know,
compared to things, and they aren't at least now, as we know, at marketing deals. Will they be marketing deals? Maybe they'll be marketing deals.
Dave Portnoy, as a Red Sox fan, should be a little bit more concerned with Rafael Devers and his historically bad start. And I say this as a diehard Yankee fan. I feel for that guy. He is inside his head so badly right now that I wouldn't be surprised if he can't get out of it. If you recall, they signed Alex Bregman in the offseason. Joey Cora, the manager of the Red Sox, said Alex Bregman was going to be his third baseman, replacing Rafael Devers. And Rafael Devers said, "I'm a third baseman. I'm not a DH." The lineup card has said something different. And he has struck out, like 90% of his at-bats when he isn't walking. So Dave Portnoy should be worried about that, because even a torpedo bat's not going to help Rafael Devers at this point.
I've also heard that I don't think Alonso's using a torpedo bat. Is that correct? And so it's
He hit a grand slam the other night.
yeah,
Yeah,
it's like
against the
I
Marlins.
don't need the torpedo batters. I'm not saying he's saying that, but this is what's going to be funny about following the story.
But
Right?
you know what? We are one data point among many of people who are talking about baseball during March Madness, during the run to the playoffs in the NBA and NFL or NHL, prior to the Masters. We're talking about baseball.
Absolutely.
Not, you know,
Absolutely.
so that Rob Manfred's probably sitting back, with his feet up on his desk and say, "Bring it on. Let's talk about it more."
Yeah, home runs, big scores do always tend to get attention. We definitely recall the old Nike ad about the long ball, which was a funny one back in the day. Probably not as politically correct as you could get away with today, but a funny one. You can look it up.
Speaking of Rob Manfred, do you know where he went to college?
That may change my outlook on what I had something I was going to say later, and then I may just drop now because you got to bring it up earlier in the show. All right. So we're not talking about NCAA yet, but I'm going to jump in right away. You asked me a question. We actually ran it on a clip this week about why the viewership was good. It's actually moderated a little bit, at least for the following after the initial weekend of the tournament. But we now have 4 number 1 seeds in, right? And
four number 1 seeds on the men's side and 3 or 4
on the
number
women's
1
side. Yep.
And then number 2.
And that number 2 being UConn, which on the women's side, which is like they should be they should almost automatically get a 1A or a 1 seed no matter what, just because of their history.
I had dinner with past guest Debbie Antonelli last night, and some other folks, and including another past guest, Eric Oberman of the Atlanta Tip-Off Club. And Debbie, we were talking about the fact that UConn has not won a national championship since 2016. So we view them as these perennial champions, but they haven't won on the women's side since 2016 when Breanna Stewart was the star of that team. I think a lot of people, despite the fact of, to your point, they're number 2 seed, they're a lot of people's favorites to win the national championship down here in Tampa.
Yeah, they're certainly coming on. Paige Beckers is rising to the occasion, as you expect superstars to do. I think it was disappointing that they had to go up against USC without Juju Watkins, which was very disappointing.
Even more disappointing was that they played in a regional final. They didn't even play in the Final Four. They had played each other in the regular season up in Hartford. And so I think the selection committee missed the boat on that one.
Yeah,
they shouldn't have met again until the Final Four, if at all.
Yeah, we had talked about that on an earlier show, that was a huge missed opportunity to set that up for a final. And they could have very easily done it. The selection committee on the women's side did not take the bait, said, no, we stand by where we're going, and this is where these should be slotted. I think that there are some reasons, maybe more so on the women's side, to think through those things, because it would have been a very easy adjustment to make sure that happened in terms of placement, not so much giving UConn a 1 seed. It definitely could have been done, but we have, as they say, it's a chalk final, right? Like the teams that were supposed to get there. And I've had people write to me, asking me, and this is a little different than the question of why have the ratings been good, which I do think that these good teams actually have, people are interested in these best teams and these best players. But the reason there are no Cinderellas is somewhat caused by the NIL situation, where players are able to move around, and the best teams have really, really great players, and those teams were very obvious. So I do think it's a bit of a factor that there aren't these Cinderella stories that we're accustomed to seeing. And I think the question in the final analysis is going to be, does that matter in terms of our interest? We say it does, because that's one of the great things about the NCAA tournament, have been these Cinderella stories. And we don't have those in the traditional sense this year.
On the men's side, we've got 2 great semifinals. at least one SEC team will make the finals game because Florida is playing Auburn in one semifinal and Houston plays Duke in the other. So whoever prevails in the Duke Houston game, I'm going to be rooting for, because my prediction was that an SEC team would not win the national championship.
I'm so excited that we get at least one more game to deal with your prediction, that it didn't, that there wasn't, that we weren't going to have an SEC-less final. Indeed, we are going to have an SEC team in the final, and to determine the national champion, and we will see if you were right. So it's a nail biter, Tim. It's a nail biter, this prediction of yours, which was the classic McGee. I'll make a prediction, but then I'll go one step further and make another prediction on top of that to make it even more difficult to come true. But that's why the listeners love you, Tim. That's why.
We shall see. I will be watching Monday's game with bated breath. We were talking before about Dave Portnoy, polarizing, shall I say? Is it the fair assessment of him? Mm-hmm. Not my cup of tea. But then again, I realize I am not the target audience for Barstool Sports, which is fine. What I do want to talk about is we came up last week with the Tony Manero Awards for good sportsmanship. I think we should have the antithesis of that. Decorum precludes me from using the words and names that I would like to at this point. But Pat McAfee, and we've talked about Pat McAfee on this show before. And again, I said I'm not a fan of his show, but he's not looking for people like me in his audience. Pat McAfee recently brought up a false story about a young woman. I won't mention her name, even though it's been widely publicized in the media. And a horrific story about this young woman and her boyfriend and her boyfriend's father. You can Google it if you want to see it. And Pat McAfee brought it up on his show, and talked about it and gave it life well beyond sort of the dark web conspiracy theory fueled platforms that are frequented by people of that ilk. And I just think ESPN has, to my knowledge, has been silent about this so far, but I just think it's absolutely disgusting. And I just wanted to call that out.
Yeah. The Athletic's done a very deep dive into this story and spoken about a lot of the details, including interviews with the young woman that was the center of the story. You know, McAfee is ESPN's big bet. They pay him a lot of money. He has a fairly long contract worth a ton of money. He makes money from FanDuel. He makes money from a number of other sources. He is the center now of the College Game Day show for ESPN, and of course his regular show that he has on. What he ultimately, his defense will be, I imagine, is I never said the name. I'll apologize, as he's had to do before with Aaron Rodgers related stuff and various other things. What just is disturbing about this story is how people with that platform, which is massive, and the kind of money that these guys make now, why they take this on.
It's a sports show.
It's a sports
show.
And
this was not a sports story.
And yes, he knows his audience, by the way. And that's, I think, the most damning thing about this.
A bunch of beta male incels. Can I?
Yeah.
Not saying all of his listeners.
And he's, by the way, he's not the only one, because again, he didn't say the name. But he made it very easy to look this up.
He had the biggest platform of anybody.
Well, several of the Barstool shows did mention as well.
After McAfee brought it up.
But these things and what happens in our culture right now, and this is, by the way, an 18-year-old young woman, a meme coin gets distributed. Like, who does this stuff? Like, where are we when this stuff becomes like, yeah, this will be fun? With her, I believe, image or name or something referencing the meme of hers and a coin being, promoted, issued, whatever. I can say how into crypto I am. But that's what I just, there needs to be some responsibility in this
an apology is not enough.
No,
in my
I don't.
estimation, ESPN needs to come down on this guy.
I don't disagree with that. They're clearly spending time with their lawyers right now because the family has sued. They're going aggressive.
Good.
And it just, I do think it's troubling in this environment that how easy things spread. We know this from a lot of things right now. And just why they would take this on when there's all kinds of stupidness, silliness, hilarity that can be discussed without going in that direction. But if that's what a guy like that with that much money and that big of a platform feels he needs to bring up, even if 100% he knew it to be true, which it's not, why would they even go there on that show? And
because he knows his audience, and we have declined as a culture, as a society, where there are people who will rationalize and condone and defend what he did and will actually get enjoyment out of it. And regardless of what the monetary settlement turns out to be, and I have no doubt there will be one, there's not enough money in the world for this woman to get her reputation back. And you and I are both parents of fathers of daughters. And so it's particularly painful when you hear happening to a young woman.
The last paragraph in the Athletic article, and I encourage anyone that wants to know more about this story to go check it out, was that McAfee talking about him becoming a softie because he's now a parent, that he has a child, and it might be a girl. I don't know that, and I'm not looking at the story right now. So if I and thinking that you think that of yourself, yet you think so little of someone else's child that you would take that on, thinking that it's not going to do anything, while you know what your audience is probably capable of. So that to me is what's just so disturbing about it all. Yeah,
even if it was true, which it wasn't, what place does it have in a sports show? It had absolutely no connection to sports whatsoever. And so he brought
it up, by the way, to Adam Schefter, who tried
who was apparently incredibly uncomfortable, tried to shift the conversation, didn't seem to have any knowledge of what he was even talking about. And he was talking about, I think the connection was, this young woman is a student at Ole Miss. They were talking about Jackson Dart and some other players at Ole Miss. And that was sort of the pretext for Pat McAfee bringing it up. Listen, I think we've talked about this enough. I'd like to sort of cleanse my palate, if you will. We're going to have a great guest on in just a moment. So we'll take a break and we'll be right back. We are back, and we are so excited to welcome our next guest. He doesn't know it, but Rick Jones is the next in line in our Legend series. He is truly a legend of the sports business. He started his career in coaching and teaching. He went on to found an incredibly successful agency. He's going to talk about his career in sports. He's going to talk about what he's got going on now. And we're going to talk about a number of different topics. So, Rick, thank you and welcome to the show.
Thanks, Tim. I love that term, legend. That just means you're old. That's the synonym for old. And I am old, so that's good.
No, you're not old. You told me something about a year or two ago that stuck with me like a fly to paper. You said you can be smart at any point in life, but you have to be older to have wisdom. And truer words have never been spoken. And you are very wise, my friend. So let's get started here. we are sitting here on the cusp of the Final Four on both the men's and women's side. You have been around the college game your entire career. Tell us your thoughts on the Final Four and the tournament in general.
Well, it captivates the American public like probably no other event. You know, for 3 weeks, people that don't even follow college basketball or sports gets involved in filling out a bracket, following teams. It's just a uniquely American institution. You know, it's been a tremendously successful over the years. This year's kind of interesting in that only for the second time ever they've gone chalk with the 4 number 1 seeds. That happened again in 2008, and that 2008 was a great tournament that the championship game went to overtime when John Calipari famously did not foul with a 3-point lead and let Chalmers hit up 3 that tied it, and Bill Self won his first national championship in overtime. I expect this weekend to be significant games. These are 4 great teams, probably the 4 best teams that end up in the championship game. I'm kind of glad that Auburn and Florida, who have played before and are in the same conference, are playing in the semifinals and not the championship game, because the championship game I always like to have 2 teams play that maybe haven't played each other, and that makes it more interesting. You know, if you look back at the history, really there have been some seminal moments in the Final Four. I think 79 was the pivotal year that really captured the public's imagination. NBC was the broadcast partner at the time, and they had 3 amazing announcers in Billy Packer, Al McGuire, and Dick Enberg. And that was the year that out of nowhere, Indiana State went undefeated. And you know, Larry Bird kind of captured everybody's imagination, and then he gets matched in the championship game against Judd Heathcote's Michigan State Spartans, led by Magic Johnson. And that game produced the great classic Magic versus Bird matchup that we remember so well in the NBA that went forward. But that was the year I think March Madness became March Madness and really captured everybody's imagination from that standpoint. I've been to 27 Final Fours. I went first in 81. I was a young coach. I was a member of the National Association of Basketball Coaches, and it was held in Philadelphia. And that was a very interesting year because you had, again, 4 amazing teams. You had 2 teams from the ACC, Virginia led by Ralph Sampson, North Carolina that was led by Al Wood, Indiana led by Isaiah Thomas, and Dale Brown had a tremendous team at LSU. And those 4 teams met in Philadelphia. And the semifinals, Indiana beat LSU in a great game, and North Carolina upset Virginia. Believe it or not, North Carolina was the underdog in that game and had lost to Virginia previously during the regular season. But what made that such an interesting weekend was on Monday morning, Ronald Reagan went to give a speech at the Hilton Hotel at DuPont Circle and got shot. And if you remember, he was in surgery, and the committee led by Wayne Duke, who was the commissioner at that time of the Big Ten, we didn't know if we were going to play the game. And so everybody's in Philadelphia, fans, everybody's saying what's going to happen because the president is in surgery. And had the president, passed away, I think they would have canceled the game. If you remember, historically, Pete Rozelle had gotten significant criticism for playing NFL games the Sunday after John Kennedy was assassinated. And I think that was still in people's minds. And so everybody's waiting. And there's a legendary story. There were a lot of legendary stories about Reagan in that day. But one of the stories is that when he finally came to, he said, I want to make sure there's a TV in my room to watch the game. And Wayne Duke said, if the president wants to watch the game, we're going to have the game. And that was a classic game that Bob Knight beat Dean Smith. Isaiah Thomas had a great game and won Bob Knight's second national championship. So, that was my first one, which was pretty, amazing. And I've enjoyed the rest of them going forward.
No, I was going to say what was incredible about that 1979 game was it was played in Salt Lake City at a basketball arena. Could you imagine the demand for that game in today's sort of the appeal of it, the NCAA, 2 stars. And another just quick trivia question or point. Magic Johnson wasn't the leading scorer on that Michigan State team. It was actually Greg Kelser.
Kelser, yeah.
Cool. Yeah,
Yeah.
and they also had Jay Vincent was a young kid on that team as well. So I'm sorry, David, I interrupted you.
Well, what I was going to say is that I think Rick and I should just talk for the next however long about ACC basketball, because that is certainly my love. And I've never seen you mentioned the Virginia team led by Ralph Sampson, of course. I've never seen as good a college basketball team as that team, and obviously one that didn't win the national championship, because that team was just so stacked and incredible, led by, of course, Ralph. I also wanted to say, there's a couple things before I even get to a question, Rick, because I feel like I've got to share. The thing about legend, I get what you say, but you have been somebody that Tim and I have respected and admired for so long, because the way you've carried yourself in this industry, and we're very thankful for all that you've done for it in terms of how many people you've mentored and showed the right way. So I did want to say that. I also wanted to say that on your podcast, which we'll talk about a little more in a second, your second episode, you talked about Billy Packer being, one of the voices along with Dick Enberg, and you made sure to call out that he went to Wake Forest, which was, of course, my alma mater. And you even went so far as to say that he worked for Bones McKinney while he was at Wake. So I was happy to hear very early on the show that you had with Bobby Cremins Wake Forest references. So I wanted to say thanks for that. Okay, back to the subject at hand and college basketball, because you are one of the foremost historians on this as well. You mentioned that on the men's side, we have a chalk final. On the women's side, we have 3 1s and a 2. First of all, do you think that's good? Or are the Cinderella stories stronger? We talked about this a little earlier in the show. And how much do things like the transfer portal affect that either lack of Cinderella stories or the more regularity that we might see in having ones progress on to the Final Four?
Well, David, we don't know yet. I mean, 1 year of data is not going to give us enough data points, but I'll make a couple of points. One, if you look historically at the Cinderella teams that made deep runs, they were senior oriented. They were guys that had played together, had been there. I don't think we're going to see that anymore. Would Steph Curry have stayed at Davidson? Probably not. Would the Loyola of Chicago team have stayed together? Probably not. So I worry that those teams are not going to stay together. I'll give you a great example. This year, there are 3 guys starting on Power 4 schools that all played at Belmont last year. Can you imagine if those 3 guys had been at Belmont this year? Would Belmont have made a deep run in the tournament? And we just don't know. But what we don't know is the other direction. We don't know guys that are signing with Power 4 schools and not playing that are now going to say, "Man, I want to play. Let me go to David Lipscomb, or let me go to Florida Atlantic, or let me go to Loyola." And I think there's going to be some of that because kids want to play. And so I understand it. But the transfer portal is going to change things. We just don't know, what happens. Look, while it went chalk this year, there were some great games that it may not have gone chalk.
Yeah, Arkansas very easily could have.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, Texas Tech, in my opinion, had Florida beat. And you make one free throw, and it's a different outcome. So, the margin of error is so small in the tournament. And sometimes the gods smile on you. The ball bounces a certain way. You get a call a certain way. There were several calls out of bounds. The rule is after 2 minutes you can review it, but before 2 minutes you can't. And there were 3 or 4 times I saw in the tournament, like, dude, you missed that call. It's off somebody else's. So it's just that piece. But we just don't know. I will say this about the transfer portal. We got to bring some sanity to it. And the way I would bring sanity to it is you can transfer one time without any repercussions. You don't have to sit. You made a mistake. You want to go play someplace one time. And then you can transfer the second time if you've graduated and are going into the graduate transfer portal. So that would be my suggestion. I did see this year a couple of teams where the guy had played on 4 different teams.
Yeah.
4 teams in 5 years. I think that's nuts. That makes no sense. Are they close to getting a degree? I can't imagine that they are. You got the rest of your life, and you may want to play college basketball or pro basketball, but life's going to get in the way, and please get a degree.
And I think we all have had an experience where whether you're coaching a team, whether you're a teammate, a fraternity brother, whatever it is, those connections that you make in college are connections that you carry through the rest of your life. And these kids aren't making that connection. They're going. I have historically been opposed to athletes being seen as employees, but what that would do would be to allow the university to create an employment contract that would prevent somebody from leaving if it violates their employment contract. So you make the contract for 2 years, for example. I do like your suggestion much better, because I don't, at its core, don't like the idea of a kid being an employee of a university. But this 4 years and 4 schools in 5 years, or 3 schools in 4 years, or 4 schools in 4, whatever it is just absurd. The example we've used on the show in the past is Aaron Judge can't say to the New York Yankees, I want to leave because Garrett Cole got hurt and we're not going to be good this year, right? So I'm going to go into a transfer portal and I'm going to join the Pirates or the Cubs or whatever it happens to be. So yeah, that's something I think has got to be done. Let's get back to the Final Four. On Sunday night in Tampa and Monday night in San Antonio, the winning teams are going to ascend a Werner ladder to cut down the nets. Shout out to our friend Stacey Gardella at Werner Ladder. Tell us how that deal came about. You were instrumental. You and Fishbait Marketing were instrumental in that deal. How did that come about? Because I think David, feel free to disagree. I think, to me, it's one of the most authentic, organic sponsorships in all of sports.
I've been so wanting to hear Rick tell this story. I've talked to him about it a little in the past, but I totally agree, and that's one of the reasons we're psyched to have you tell it, Rick.
Well, first of all, I'd rather be lucky than good. I'd like to make up something and say, hey, it was my genius and all that. It really wasn't. Back to your ACC questions and good biases, as I think. Everett Case had come to NC State in the early 1950s from Indiana, and Indiana basketball had a tradition of cutting down the nets, believe it or not, in the 1930s and 40s. And Case brought it to NC State, and they won the first ACC tournament in 1954. And he had them lift him up, and he cut down the nets. And then people figured out, it's a little easier on the body. Just bring out a ladder and cut down the nets. And so they started cutting down the nets in the ACC tournament, and then ultimately cutting down the nets in the NCAA tournament with just whatever ladder they potentially had. I also like that because of the fact that when Mr. Naismith invented the game, you threw it in a peach basket and you had to get a ladder to go up and get the ball out of the peach basket before they figured out just cut out the damn bottom of the peach basket. And so in 2008, there was a guy named Chris Filardi at Werner Ladder, and it's interesting context. Werner Ladder had been a family-owned business out of Greenville, Pennsylvania for a long, long time, and they sold the company. And so now you have a venture capital company owning Werner Ladder, and what's the first thing you want to do with the venture capital is you want to build a brand and sell it. And so you had a very eager brand for having some brand visibility. And at the time, Lowe's was the sponsor of the NCAA. They're not any longer. Home Depot is the sponsor now. And there was a mechanism for Lowe's vendors to participate in March Madness in a certain way. And the fact that Warner sold through Lowe's allowed that to happen. And so late very, very late in 2008, they found a Werner Ladder, gave them some rights, and allowed them to be on the floor in 2008. Well, immediately Devin Edwards, our good friend at CBS, told Chris Filardi, you need some help. If you want to make this thing really work. And I was fortunate that Devin recommended me to meet with Chris, and we had dinner in Charlotte when he was there to visit with Lowe's, and I convinced him that we could make this pretty successful. And then the first year we rolled out a full-fledged program with branding and all that was in 2009 up in Detroit. And unfortunately, my client, Chris Filardi, had open heart surgery right before the Final Four and missed it. And so on one hand, he didn't get in the way, and he let me do whatever I wanted to do. And so we laugh about that. And we did some things that year that allowed it to become, kind of legendary in terms of, and one of the things that we did was we used coaches as the metaphor of the ladder. The ladder, you don't do anything with a ladder. You use a ladder to do something else, change the light bulb, clean your gutters, paint, whatever. Same thing with coaches. Coaches can't play, but they're facilitators for players playing and for championships. And so that was a big piece of what we did, Tim, with getting Warner involved with the Naismith Coach of the Year award and just doing a lot of things. I also love the fact that to win a championship, you have to climb a ladder. You have to, there's no escalator in college basketball. you gotta climb this ladder one step at a time in building a championship team. And so there's a lot of metaphors that go into that, but it is so authentic. It is, it's the one brand that appears on the floor itself in a way that's meaningful. It's not phony. It's a meaningful thing. And over the years, we've done some interesting things. Originally, it was an 8-foot ladder, branded ladder. Then we built a podium ladder because the podium ladder is safer to use. And then we figured out, hey, a 9-foot podium ladder shows up better on television. And while we don't sell a 9-foot podium ladder, that's the ladder that we use for cutting down the nets. When we had the 75th anniversary of the NCAA, we had a 75th anniversary ladder with every coach's name on the ladder, and had a reunion of coaches that had cut down the nets and done a lot of interesting things. So it continues to be a really authentic moment. And I've gotten to know so many coaches and to watch the joy, because the last person to cut down the net after all the players cut down is that head coach. And that's that iconic moment where the coach takes the net and waves it and acknowledges the crowd and his team. And just it's a long journey for coaches. And think about the great coaches that have never coached in a Final Four. There have been a bunch of them. And to get to the Final Four and get to a championship game and win a national championship is very rare indeed. And it's great for Warner to be part of that final moment.
Yeah, it truly is one of the great organics. I could be on the Mount Rushmore of great organic sports marketing programs for sure.
Yeah, Kenny Smith on the show the other day, they came out of commercial, and Warner has had commercials running obviously during the tournament. Came out and out of break and said that since he never won a national championship at UNC, when he won a championship with the Rockets, they typically don't cut down the nets in the NBA. He took a Warner ladder out to the court and cut down the net, and he has it in his house. So,
it's interesting. I always wanted to do a commercial with Gino. Gino's won a bunch of them. And my commercial, we never ran it, but my commercial was his wife tells him, Gino, go clean out the gutters. And he goes in his garage, and there's 11 water ladders. Like, which one do I take today to clean out the gutters?
Yeah.
Speaking of that, while I live in South Carolina, I love what Dawn Staley's done. I would love to see Gino win this year. He's been such an ambassador for women's basketball. He's got a great team. They haven't won it in a long, long time. It would be
2016.
Yeah, it would be fun for me personally, because I know Gino and I have so much respect for him. And Paige is such a great player and has not won one. I would love for Connecticut to cut down.
Yeah, and what that would mean, obviously, if Paige has the type of Final Four that I think she's setting up to, it would be epic for sure. All right, we're gonna shift gears a little bit. We mentioned in the intro, and you touched on it as well, that you started your career teaching, coaching. We're curious how that has informed the way you go about managing, how you've gone about running your businesses and mentoring people in this business.
Two quick stories about the transition. I gave a speech at the Fuqua Business School a few years ago and asked for Q&A at the end of it. And one of the budding MBA students raised his hand and said, Rick, how do you go from being a college basketball coach to being a successful sports marketing executive. And I said, well, it's really a lot easier than you think. You don't win any games. and there's probably a lot of truth to that. And David, you may not know this. My crossroads involved Wake Forest. I had been a coach at Swanee at the University of the South. I'd gone back to graduate school at Georgia State and got a master's in sports management with the full intention of continuing to coach. And I got hired by Carl Tacey, who was the head coach at Wake Forest, to be the #1 assistant at Wake. And I went on my honeymoon. Charlotte and I got married, went to the Napa Valley, and we got up on Monday morning after getting married on Saturday and read that Carl Tacey had resigned. And I called Coach, and he said, Rick, I didn't want to bother you on your honeymoon. And I said, you think I'm bothered? You got to talk to my wife. I mean, she's really bothered. And in fairness, Wake Forest hired a guy named Bob Stack from Miami of Ohio, who came in to coach, and he wanted to bring people, his own assistants. He didn't know me from Adam, so I don't have a job. And fortunately, I had done an internship in my graduate program at Georgia Tech, and I'd gotten to know Homer Rice and Norman Airy and other people at Georgia Tech. And Dr. Rice, who was a great mentor to me, said, Rick, come be my marketing director this year, and we'll get you a coaching job next year. And I never went back. That was what God intended for me to do. And it's really fascinating that Wake, I kid people that if I'd have gone to Wake, nobody would have heard of Mike Krzyzewski. I'd have been to Mike Krzyzewski, and Wake would have been Duke. But that was my position. It's interesting as a coach, the first thing you realize is you can't play. You better get players. And I think running an agency is the same thing. Hire smart people. Like you use Warner Ladder. The first person I hired at Fishbait was Brittany Schiller. She wasn't even married then. She was Brittany Harmon. She'd been an intern at the WBCA. And she's so much better at things than I am. I'm a visionary kind of person, but I'm not a great detail person. I'm not a great execution person, and she's great at that. And so a lot of the success that we've had with Warner really is a tribute to Brittany. Brittany ran the business and has done it brilliantly. Well, I think as a leader, you need to realize what you're good at and what you're not so good at. And then what you're not so good at, hire people that are really good at that. And then let them do their jobs, get out of their way. I mean, give them resources to be successful, ask them where you can add value. But I'm not a micromanaging person. Clearly when people are more talented than other things, it always led me to believe this. I had 2 children, and they were both very good students, but Ryan would come home with a B, and I'd get mad at the B. Well, it took me a long time to realize he's going to make a living out of his A's, and he can go hire the B's. So I think as running an agency, find out what people do great, and then make them greater at what they do great. And don't try to say, go fix something you're not good at. Hell, go hire somebody that's good at what you're not good at. And that was same thing with coaching. Some people are great at rebounding. Put them in a position to be great rebounders. Some people can score. I had a kid that played for me at Swanee named Blaine Brooks. And honestly, he could not guard my grandmother, and she was dead. Okay. So, you had to hide him defensively, but he could shoot it. Really shoot it. And then that was the era before the 3-point shot, the era before the shot clock. And we just had this rule. Anybody can shoot a layup, but you better not take a jump shot till Brooks has touched it 3 times. He's going to at least get 3 shots at making it before you're going to take one. And I think that's the same way in running a business or running an agency.
Well, speaking of which, you recently decided to walk away from Fishbait Marketing, the agency that you founded, to pursue some passion projects. Tell us about some of the things that you're involved with now.
I turned 70 last year. I turned 71 last month. At 70, you kind of begin to reassess. Y'all have been very kind in your words about me, but at some point in life, becoming significant becomes more important than becoming successful. And there's a difference. And so, Tim, I really looked at, the last maybe decade or maybe hopefully 2 decades of my career. I wanted to do more significant things. And there were really 3 things that I wanted to do One, I love to produce content. I'm writing several books. I'm writing a Broadway play. I'm doing this new podcast. I have a second podcast in mind with a project that I'm doing. And so producing content, I think was really important. I have a son who's a filmmaker who works with me, and the ability to create content that he can produce and putting him on a road for success long-term was important to me. That's number one. Number two, I'm doing this big project connected to the America 250, our 250th birthday, called Sail Forth 250 and Sail 250. We're going to bring maritime festivals and tall ships to 5 East Coast port cities: New Orleans, Norfolk, Baltimore, Boston, and New York. That I think will be significant to help us celebrate. I really am concerned about kind of the meanness in America, if that makes sense. That we can, we used to disagree without being so damn disagreeable. And I'll tell you a quick story, a basketball metaphor for that. Coach Wooden tells a wonderful story about early in his career at UCLA. He was up at Corvallis at Oregon State, just getting the fool beat out of him. I mean, he thought he had a bad call in front of him, and he stood up and he yelled at the official as he ran by. He said, "Bobby, that's the worst call I've ever seen." And as Bobby ran by, he said, "Well, John, they liked it on the other end." And think about it politically. They liked it on the other end. I mean, none of us have cornered the market of being right about everything all the time. And so I'm hoping that the 250th anniversary of America can bring us back together. Can we celebrate our uniqueness as Americans and not focus on our differences and differing political opinions? And so that was important to me. And the third thing is, I really want to do more charitable work. There's some passions that I have around charities. And I think there's some skills that I can bring to help charities raise more dollars and have greater impact. And so those are the 3 kind of buckets, Tim, that I'm looking at. I'm looking at, producing more content, really doing something around America 250, and then doing more things with charities like the V Foundation or the Mike Sly Foundation, or some of the other charities. Debbie, for example, I want to work with Debbie Antonelli. She has a great program where she shoots free throws and raises money. I think there's a way to help her scale that. We've talked about ways that I can do that. And when you're at an agency with other shareholders and other people, your priorities are different. You got to make a profit. You got to do certain things, and I wanted to go in a different direction. So that's great. Why I've done that.
That's great.
We had Debbie was on, did our podcast some time ago, and we talked about her charity. We love that as well. Yeah, you would be tremendous in support of that, and congratulations on all these efforts. Normally before we let a guest go, we ask 2 questions, and they're always the same questions, but I'm going to take a little different tack with you. Tim, forgive me. Let me go this direction. Please. Because first of all, the first question is usually, how'd you get your start in the business? I think we've covered that. And the second question is usually, what advice would you have for someone looking to break in? Which is a fine question, and I'm going to go, but I'm going to do it, frame it a little differently for you, Rex. So you published a book called Analog Advice in a Digital World, a Baby Boomer's Words of Wisdom for the Millennial Generation. I'm fortunate to have a signed copy of that book, by the way. Tim, I'm just trying to make you jealous.
Yeah, you did.
Yeah. And what I wanted to do is offer through that book. It's a great read for anyone interested in it. Pick it up. Anything from that book that you'd like to share that would address particularly someone looking to get into this business?
Well, the first chapter is intentional. The name of the chapter is Mediocrity is Excellence to the Mediocre. And there's a lot of mediocrity out there. Ryan and I were doing something yesterday. My son Ryan and I we actually filmed Sam Jones yesterday. Sam Jones is a legendary barbecue guy in North Carolina that does whole hog barbecue. And I had a chance to spend the day with Sam Jones, and Sam and I talked about that a little bit, about excellence is hard. It's hard. Nick Saban talks about that type A people, overachievers, are resented by other people. I try to tell people it's crowded at the bottom. There's room at the top. Be excellent. But I reminded Ryan yesterday, 80% of life is just showing up. Show up on time, prepared, and do your job. And don't be mediocre. And for young people, I just say, whatever you do, if you're going to sweep gym floors, be excellent at it. If you're going to make cold calls to sell season tickets, be excellent at it. If you're going to run promotions at halftime, be excellent at it. Don't be mediocre. And I really think for young people, excellence still counts and still stands out. I tell young people all the time, unfortunately, you probably need to know somebody to get a job, but you got to know something to keep it and to grow it. And, Coach Wooden had a great line. He said, make every day your masterpiece. Well, what he meant was whatever you're doing today, whatever endeavor you're pursuing, be great at it, be excellent at it. And I think that's important for young people. And so that's why I intentionally in that book put that as the first chapter, is to set the boundaries. And going forward, the rest of the lessons in that book won't work unless you master the first one. Try to be great at everything you do.
That is fantastic advice. Can't thank you enough for coming on, Rick, but we would be remiss if we didn't ask you to plug your latest podcast before you leave. What's it called and where can people find it and what's it all about?
Yeah, it's interesting. It's a niche podcast. It's called Shaboom. I had realized that so few marketers talk to my generation, to baby boomers. In fact, most people think we're dead. Most marketers think we're dead. And there's 1 million baby boomers out there. We control about 80% of the disposable income in America, and we own $84 billion in real estate. So interestingly, over the next 20 years, will be the largest wealth transfer in the history of the world. There's going to be a transfer back to our children or to charities or to other entities. That's pretty interesting. And I looked out into the universe of the myriad of podcasts that were out there, and I couldn't find one that was really addressed about my generation and what we've been through, the wisdom that we may have because of what we've been through, but we're not done yet. And so I produced this podcast. It's called Shaboom, SH-BOOM, and it's named after a famous song from the 1950s called Shaboom, Shaboom. And so it's a podcast all about baby boomers. I was born in March of 1954, and that song came out in March of 1954.
That's great.
So that is an old song, but a fun song. And what I'm trying to do is each week has a theme, whether that theme is politics or religion or March Madness or cowboys or summer loves or places to eat. And bring in a guest speaker to kind of talk about that. So Shaboom, you can find it on Apple, Spotify, iHeart, pretty much anywhere.
Tim, we might need to consider actually coming into each show with a theme, but that would probably require a little more prep. However, I will say this, Rick, when you get the Broadway show complete and it's off Broadway or whatever the case is, it's going through its runs, come back. We want to talk about it because we are, I think, the only sports business podcast that regularly talks about Broadway. Just saying.
Yeah. I mean, clearly, everybody laughs at me when I say I have this play, but I do have this play. I've almost completed writing it. I have some people helping me on it. It's about the life and times of a great R&B singer named Jackie Wilson. Jackie Wilson was a very interesting character. Jackie Wilson was, Elvis before Elvis. He was James Brown before James Brown. And it's a story I think people will like. So
we look forward to hearing that come to fruition. So congrats on that. All right. With that, I think we're going to take a break again. Rick, thank you so much for your insights, not just on this show, but for all that you've provided over the years. Appreciate it.
Well, I appreciate the kind words. Y'all got a great podcast. I love the people that you bring on, but I also like the camaraderie that the two of y'all have together, which I think is really, really fun. And so keep up the good work, and let's enjoy the championships this weekend. Somebody's going to win the Naismith Trophy, Tim, which is exciting. That's a big thing that you're involved in and well-deserved. Yeah. I'm excited to see, who's going to be the next Naismith Coach of the Year, the next Naismith Player of the Year.
Well, we'll be announcing the women's winners today here in Tampa, where I am, and then we fly out to San Antonio tomorrow. We'll be announcing the winners on the men's side on Sunday. So I'm very excited to be part of these. We have some fantastic winners this year. I think they're,
and he has so much integrity. He has so much integrity. Even though this probably won't get published till after the announcement, he won't announce who they are on this show. You think he would care about this podcast a little more?
No, it would be inappropriate for me to comment. But I think that old saying, "It's an honor to be nominated." I think we have some fantastic nominees, but our winners are very well deserving of their awards.
It's going to be fun. All right. Thanks for having me, guys.
Thanks, Rick.
See you. Bye.
Bye. Well, thank you again to Rick Jones. Truly a legend in this business. What a fantastic person. What an incredible sports marketer, author, podcaster, content creator. Can't be more thankful for him to coming on the show. David, now's the point in the show where we take a look forward, we give shout outs, and we thank our audience. So what's on your mind?
Couple things. First of all, I'm excited for you to be down in Tampa and announcing the Naismith Award winners on the women's side. Looking forward to seeing how that plays out, of course. I did have a couple shout outs. You mentioned a few past guests. I got together last night for some beers with another former past guest, Steve Letta, Jake. He was in town announcing a new sponsorship. So congratulations to 2311 Racing. And landing the Robin Hood sponsorship. And if you don't know, 2311 is co-owned by Michael Jordan and Denny Hamlin. And of course, once again, Jake in classic form is able to as smoothly drop MJ into a conversation as anyone. But he's like so legit because he's the owner of the team and he's dealing with him nonstop. So I'm just sitting there and when he talks about it, it always kind of cracks me up. But Jake is an amazing guy and we'll have to have him back on the show again at some point. I also wanted to mention, this is the kind of stuff I get from people talking about the podcast, but Todd Parker, who is a Cornell guy, doing some work with Play 5, former IMG guy, I know. He played lacrosse at Cornell as well, it sounds like. But he just writes to me and he goes, "Hey, let Tim know that Cornell is currently 1 in lacrosse." I'm like, do you think he doesn't know that? Like, how would he not know that? He talks about it all the time. Anyway, I got a kick out of the fact that Todd thought he should let me know that I need to let you know that Cornell is currently ranked number 1.
Yeah, what a great guy Todd is. And yes, I did know that. And they beat up on Albany the other night. Monday night, so they have one loss, and that was in overtime. I think they are poised to make a deep run in the tournament this year. So I've just got a couple of quick shout outs. First of all, I want to give a shout out to Tyler O'Neill of the Baltimore Orioles. He has hit a home run on opening day in 6 straight years. That's incredible. And he's batting like .571 so far this year. So I wanted to give a shout out to him. I just think that's a fantastic performance. What I'm keeping an eye on is Adam Silver recently announced that he is working with FIBA to create a European league, including some of the top teams in Europe. So that's something I think we both will be keeping an eye on going forward. Again, thank you to Rick Jones, but thank you also to all of you who listen, who comment, who post, who subscribe and like us. We are very, very grateful for that. Until next week, Heath DP, I'm McGee, and we'll talk soon.